Hello,
Woo!
Dane. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being my guest at the Access Me Salon.
I
Access
love
Me,
being your guest on the Access Me Salon. So cool.
I will ask you some private, intimate questions today. So this is not about the Dane facilitating and changing the world.
Sure it
Access,
is.
of course it will be. Access Me is this incredible fundus
A
of
fundus? It's a
recording
fundus. There's a fundus among us.
where you can find so many
Yeah,
things.
there's a fundus. Watch out. Do not touch the fundus. Yeah.
Well, go touch it and go find the class when Dane was a class participant. I want to ask you about the time when you came along. We know the story with the bath class that you read the little ad in the newspaper. I want to know what was the very first class, Dane, that you took with Gary Douglas, and how did that go?
Oh dear, I love thinking about it too because it was such a pivotal point in my life because bars literally saved my life. And I avoided doing foundation or anything else because I kind of didn't want the dream to die. We have a question, how does it get any better than this? I was asking, but I was not believing. I was like, I'm good. I'm good. I was good getting bars every week and trading with Shannon, and it was so interesting because there was this level 2 and 3 that we now call CFP that was coming up in San Francisco, and we were living in Santa Barbara. And Shannon was like, "Are you coming?" I'm like, "Oh no, I don't think so." And then I met Gary and ESB. ESB happened, and with the very first session with him, this whole universe of miracles opened up. And I started seeing everything through the eyes of how miraculous could this be? And so this level 2 and 3 was coming up, and I was like, I sorry, I'm not gonna go because I didn't have the money to pay for it. And Gary said, look, he said, and please everybody don't try to do this, but at that time it worked because basically it was like me, Gary, and 6 other people in Access. No, just kidding, not quite that dynamic, but it was a much smaller thing. Man, it's amazing to think how small it was. We were in this room and there were, I think, 25 people maybe, and in this tiny little cheap ass hotel and just north of San Francisco. But the, I told him I couldn't go, and he said, "Look, I will trade you sessions." He said, "But you have to work on my whole family too." I was like, "Oh my God, you're the most generous motherfucker on the planet." Also, I was charging $25 a session for my wonderful chiropractic delivery. And he said, "Look, but I'm going to pay you 75 a session." I'm like, "Holy shit." And he's like, "Yeah, what you do is worth it." So I went there based on the fact that I had an agreement to be able, because I wasn't willing to be gifted it, and not from a place of not receiving, but from wanting to honor the gift that this thing is, this amazing thing called access. And over the course of that weekend, wow, it's like it's so interesting because I listen to audios all the time, you know, and what I know about them, and I learned this by getting the audios of that class and listening to them all the time. And I mean all the time. I mean, I wore out cassette tapes. And guess how Daddy Dane had to listen to audios, you lazy fucks. I didn't just have an app with thousands of classes there where I'm like, oh, press play. Oh my God, it's too much. I just can't figure it out. There's just too much here. Oh, can't you organize it? Hey, I listen to cassette tapes, asshole. All right. Okay. Not only that, but the guy that was doing everything that brought up, Puck and Pod, the guy that was doing the recording at the time, he had one little microphone from Radio Shack up on the wall or on a table somewhere in the room to get everybody's questions. So you would hear this on the cassette tapes, okay? And I walked around with a cassette player, kind of like what's his name in Guardians of the Galaxy. You know, he wouldn't take it like that was his most vital possession, right? And for a long time, I didn't even have an auto reverse cassette player because I couldn't afford one. So I had to, once the side ended, I had to switch to the other side. I was like, okay, but I was willing to do whatever it took. And there was such an energy on these audios that every time I listened, I changed more. Every single time I listened, I heard something where I was like, has that always been there? Shit, Gary, did you say this? He's like, yeah. I'm like, whoa, that's weird. And it made me aware of how much I wasn't hearing. But being in that class, you know, and I would listen to the audios, and because there was only one little microphone for participant questions, you would hear, and Gary go, oh my God, that is the question to unlock all of consciousness. Let me share, you know. And so, you know, I'd turn it up. I'd be like trying to hear what they said. And it wasn't really that relevant because it was what he answered in response to it. But I remember asking him questions about things like money. And I also remember before going to that class, I was like, okay, I really need to change my money situation and I need some help. And in that particular class, there was enough info to deliver an intro class on money, an intro class on relationships, and an intro class on bodies. And I was like, holy shit. So I came home and I did an intro class on money, my favorite subject. And it was so interesting to be there and ask questions from an earnest desire for change, and also to perceive how a group of people in a room who were actually desiring something different created a space for it to occur, you know? And
So you did ask questions to Gary in that class.
yeah,
I am curious now because I want to find it on the Access Me app and listen to your very first question. Can you give a little hint what year I need to look for?
I think it's 2001, 2001 level 2 and 3. And I think it was in Corte Madera, California, somewhere in Northern California. It might have said San Francisco or Corte Madera or something like that.
So did you just ask questions or did you also offer sessions in that class?
Oh my God. Oh, dude. Once again, that everything that the class presented, everything Gary presented, just changed my whole world because he said, look, here's the other thing I'm going to allow you to do. He's like, what you do, nobody else does. He's like, come up and you can work on people, you know, you can do sessions in the back of the room and I'll announce for you that you're doing these sessions. Cause I'd literally just started doing ESP and I was like, and, you know, and I was doing it with people in my practice, my chiropractic practice, who were sort of getting it, sort of not, right? And so for me, I had so many issues regarding asking for money, well, asking for anything, receiving anything, really, because as we have been told, even if we don't get it, a lack of money truly is only from a lack of receiving, and points of view about receiving. And so he said, okay, tell me how much you want to charge for your sessions. Well, I was trading with him. I was charging $25 for my chiropractic sessions. And he said, tell me how much you want to charge. And so here's the, oh my God. So here's the other interesting part is he's like, hey, you can go with us driving from Santa Barbara up to San Francisco. And I went, oh my God, thank you so much. So I pile in the car with Shannon, somebody else, and this guy Raymond, and I have with me 10 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And they're on this stuff called sprouted grain bread. I don't know if any of you have ever tried sprouted grain bread, but if you would like a sample of it, go out in somebody's yard where they have grass, get down on all fours and just start chewing on the grass. Yeah, like that. It tastes like that without the yumminess of chlorophyll. So take the chlorophyll out. Maybe you're better off if you just dig up the grass and chew on the dirt. Yeah. Put peanut butter and jelly on that shit. Okay. Now, the reason I was doing that was because number one, it's healthy, but number two, um, the sandwiches would last. Oh, balloons. You're welcome. Hello. I do the weirdest shit. Zoom just like it's here. Let me do the thing that I learned and see if it
Oh,
works.
you have the
Oh,
oh, you have this AI feature.
hearts for my people. Hello. Right here, people. Um, I also brought so these sandwiches last a long time because they're basically on cardboard that's in the form of something natural or I don't know. And I brought several pounds of trail mix with M&Ms in it because I like M&Ms in my trail mix. It's the only reason I actually eat trail mix. And I brought granola bars. If you've never eaten a granola bar, just take a piece of cardboard right now and start chewing on that. Here was my flavor profile. Awesome. Now, here's the thing. I took this, and while we were on our way up there, I'm like, hey, does anybody want a sandwich? And everybody's like, no. I'm like, anybody want trail mix? No. Anybody want a granola bar? No. Like, who are you and what the fuck are you trying to feed us? Kind of was the general consensus in the car, right? But what they didn't know is this was my food for the weekend. I didn't have money to pay for food. I didn't fucking have money to pay for lunch, man. And so, and also, I, Gary put me in touch with this lady who had a house where all of us poor access people were staying, like a bunch. It was like a house, and there were like 18 people that were staying there. And so I went there, and on the way to class the next day, it was like 45 minutes from class. On the way to class the next day, I said, will you help me with something? Gary asked me how much I want to charge, and I don't know what to say. He says what I'm doing is miraculous, but I'm scared, and she said, okay. So, and we did some processing that we had at the time, which, by the way, another element for you guys is the processing we have now is only about 1 billion times more effective. And but listening to the old processing, you apply the new and it becomes even more effective. But so she said, okay, what would you be almost terrified to ask for? Like what amount, if you asked for it, would be so exciting it would be almost terrifying? And I was like, oh my God, okay, for like a session, I'll probably do like an hour, $60. And I could barely say the words $60. I was like, $60. And she went, okay, cool. And so we got there, and Gary's like, so how much do you want to charge? I went, oh, I said, I'm going to tell people that you're doing sessions and recommend you. I went, $60. And so class starts, and he goes, hey, this is Dain. I just met him. I don't know what the fuck he does, but it's miraculous. Normally he charges $120 for a session, but for you guys, it's only 80. I was like, all the beyonds, creating the beyond, eternally beyond. I kept running that. It didn't help. And I was like, oh my God. And I had all these people. So I had several people sign up on day one and I worked on them. And then they would go tell other people. And then I had so many people, I couldn't work on them all. And I was like, oh my God, not one person paid me less than $120. And some people paid me more. And it was so much fun to have people who were able to let in this weirdness that I was being as a magical element. It changed my fucking life. So there.
Oh, well, I want to go on the app now and listen to the class because I want to hear the Dane that is blown away by the fact that Gary just outcreated him.
Dude, boy, did he outcreate me. And the other thing you're going to notice is this voice here was a lot more like this. You'll be like, is that Dain or Mickey Mouse? Who's talking at the microphone there? And it was so funny because even then, I had so much insecurity and all this stuff, but I was still at the microphone making jokes. And if you can find this audio, there's one thing that I said that was so funny, and this guy who was so literal did not get it. He's like, I think he's serious. And it was such a funny moment where I'm like, no, I can actually also be the humor that I am. And Gary laughed his ass off, and everybody laughed when this guy thought it was serious what I was saying because it was such a joke. And I was like, wow, I can actually be in a place where my humor is appreciated too. Wow.
Wow, that's wonderful. I mean, we all know you stayed around Access. You're still there years or months later. You then became the co-creator. But
Mhm.
I'm sure Gary didn't hire you to do level 2 and 3 right away. What was your first job within Access? How did your time with Access continue?
Let's just say Gary's a brilliant motherfucker. He hired me to make phone calls. Okay. So here we were. And what would happen is it was a way, anyway, so he hired me to make phone calls. Guess how many phone calls I made in my entire time of being hired to make phone calls? One. I was terrified of making phone calls. To this day, I hate making phone calls, and I will very seldom make them. So if you ever try to call me or get a hold of me, I'm like, yeah, I'll probably call you back next decade. Okay. Whatever. But he knew, he just knew I had an energy that would contribute. So he hired me to make phone calls. And what would actually happen is we would get together and talk consciousness. He would come over in the morning, like I'd go do my run or whatever. And if I had sessions or whatever, and then he would come over and we would explore consciousness for hours upon hours upon hours. And most of this exploration was, will you help me, please? I'm fucked up in this area and I want to change it. And then what would happen is I'd get over it. And then 5 minutes later, I'd be like, hey, there's something else. And he'd be like, can't you just fucking be happy? I'm like, no, not as long as there's something else. If there's something else, I'm going to say there's something else. And what was interesting is a few months after he said, can't you just be happy? He's like, I need to apologize to you. He's like, every time you say there's something else, there's actually something else. And I appreciate you being willing to keep going. And I was like, cool, then I'll keep going.
So I also know from my inside information where I prepared for the interview, you then started actually being involved in the recordings. How did that?
Oh, yeah. It was a happy time for all. What happened was, so this guy oh man, I got so frustrated in my own world because this guy didn't care about the quality. He was there to support his lifestyle. And oh my goodness. So finally, he and his wife, and this was Gary's basic core team when I came along. And it was this guy and his wife, and they were, wow, interesting to say the least on so many levels. I could tell stories. Um, and so eventually they left. And it was interesting because they weren't, yeah. So anyway, eventually they left, and I'm like, hey, I'll do the recording. See, my point of view is I will do anything required except make a phone call. Anyway, pretty much anything except make a phone call. And so I'm like, hey, Gary, let me do the recording. So I started doing the recordings, and I was like, these cassettes are a little dated. So I found this little Sony stick recorder. And so here's the thing. So I set up, and if here's the thing about me doing the recordings, if you came in, because I would, you know how we have our tech team. If you come in early, you see them setting up and all that, and they handle this and handle that. That was me. I was the tech team. Okay.
You
So
alone.
I alone was the tech team. And the interesting part was if you came in to try to talk to me while I was setting up, I would bite your fucking head off. People literally would be like, don't talk to Dane right now. And I would be cranky for hours. I don't even know why. Obviously, it was not something that, if what's true makes you lighter, this was not true or something. I don't know, man, And and so, but what I did was I got this little memory stick, this Sony voice recorder that I actually found when we were traveling to Australia. And I'm like, I'm going to try this. And it only had a little mini jack. And I had one microphone that was, it was a somewhat nice, like good sort of vocal microphone. that was, that you would use in a studio, but not that expensive. And somehow the way I put all the wiring together to go from this XLR, the output of the microphone, through the little mixing board, which I had to have, which was tiny, and all the wires that I put together to create an input connection that would receive this, I was able to capture the entire room with one microphone up in front by Gary. The entire room. And it was awesome. Okay. And you could hear people, well, way better than you could before, at least, right? And so it was some element of conscious magic. It was not me thinking, it was, how do I plug this into this? Oh, I'm going to add this plus this and this Y connector. Oh, two Y connectors. Oh, I'm sorry, four Y connectors with I mean, dude, it looked like spaghetti, one end to the other. And after a while, Gary was like, hey, this guy came and said that he wants to do the recording. There was two things. One was this guy said he wants to come and do the recording. So he came, and he was just such a pain to work with, such a superior ass. And the funny part was he saw my contraption and went, well, this is unacceptable. We need to do something better. So he ripped it all apart, and I was never able to replicate it. So he left after a very short amount of time. And then I was left with putting microphones in the front, trying to put backstops behind them to capture the sound, like one of those, like one of those pointy things where they're spying on you. And like I was trying to replicate that. So I had all these microphones and all this setup and all this equipment, and I hated it. And we were in a foundation class in Arizona one day, and Susie came to Gary and was like, hey, do you think you might want help with the audio? And Gary's like, hey, how about if we have Susie do the audio? I was like, no. Number one, I was controlling. Number two, I didn't want to lose the income because it was part of how I was supporting myself, which is very funny because every time since then where I've been willing to give it up, I always create more, make more, and it's always easier. Just a note for some of you who are holding on to some things, just a teaching access moment. So she took over, and oh my God, what a gift. It was, I mean, and she's so brilliant at figuring things out and putting things together that nobody else has. And I realized how much control I was trying to do, how much stress I was doing as a result of trying to do the control and trying to get it perfect and having it not work, you know. And she was the one who came up with the idea, what if we just hand people microphones? I'm like, oh my God, it's brilliant. Consciousness has spoken, because she tried following in my footsteps of having microphones. Oh man, it was a thing, and a
So
really
you
great
were
thing to
not
let go of.
fired. You were literally Peter principled to a different department.
Yes.
What was your next step in your
My
career?
my different department was being able to do sessions.
Mhm.
Gary said to me, he's like, look, what's going to create more in the world, you holding on to the recording or you doing sessions? I went, oh, sessions. He went, okay. Do you suppose that if you could do some more sessions, then the financial element that you're so worried about might not be an issue? I went, oh my God, I have been such an idiot. But it's funny, you get it when you get it. When you're doing control and you have that need to control everything, you don't realize that it's actually easier to let it go because we're trying to avoid the bad outcome, which is what I was trying to do. But in that, you're assuming there's going to be a bad outcome, which keeps you from the miracle that could show up. Anyway.
Well, I'm glad you followed your knowing back then, because then there came a time when Gary asked you to facilitate a core class. And since we're talking about recordings of old classes, do you remember the first class you facilitated, the first core class
Shall
that
we
is
call
now on
it
Access Me?
relation fucking ship? Okay. I think that was the very first class we co-facilitated. And we had the women come in one night, and over the course of the evening, we got them over their judgments of men. And it was so cool because they were like, okay, I don't hate men anymore. I would actually like one. Okay, cool. And we had the men the next night, and the men were just so, or anyway, you get the idea. We had them on separate nights, and then we had them together for 2 days. And the men were these sweet creatures who'd never been acknowledged, who just wanted a woman to care for them and somebody who liked them to have sex with. And I mean, it wasn't complicated, you know, men, women, you can understand the difference. Okay. And what was so interesting is when we got together on the weekend, the women overnight or over whatever had built up all of their shit about how wrong men were. You don't hear a man speak until the second day at around noon because there was no space for their point of view to show up. It was so interesting to me to recognize that dynamic, and you see it energetically. And there was a lot of cool stuff that we got to. It was really helpful for a lot of people at the time, and I think still would be helpful for people, especially that sort of it's interesting when you listen to a class like that, because like a lot of people are like, no, I want today's change now, you know, I want the latest and greatest, which I understand that also. I think you should have that too, you know. But what you get is this invaluable sense of the energies that we all came from, but also within there's so many awarenesses and also things we may not even address with words anymore, of things that stick us that we can let go of simply from having our attention put on it. Plus, it gives this sort of backstory to the stories that are going on in our lives and in the world and in the universe, and a lot of times the things where there might be possibilities we can't choose. It's really kind of cool and fun to go listen to those, actually.
So if our listeners want to listen to that class that you co-facilitated with Gary, your very first facilitation, what year would they need to look for a relationship class? A little hint?
Probably 2002, maybe 2003, somewhere in that range. We started co-facilitating really quickly. And the very first facilitators that we actually did, because Simone Milicis asked Gary, because she wanted to facilitate, that we put together in Houston in Curry's living room, or lounge room, as Simone likes to say. I'm calling it a lounge room now because I've heard Simone tell it. What? Whatever the fuck that is. That's some gaslighting. No, just kidding. So we put it, and Gary was there at registration, taking payments and registering people. Simone paid with magnets. I was there as a co-facilitator, and some of the craziest people you've ever met were there too. I mean, it was just, you know, and here we are in somebody's living room with, I don't know, 11, 12 people as our facilitators class for that year. I mean, it's like, dude.
Well, 20 years fast forward, Access is in 183 countries, a worldwide movement where every day an Access class is occurring. Um, which brings me to my last question. Everywhere, Access consciousness is in 803 countries. You have probably traveled to 120 of them. Um, what is
In my
your
mind.
what is your favorite country or place to go, or is every place unique for you?
Every place is unique, and every place has its great things, and you know, its fixed points of view. And for me, um I it's so interesting to get the gift of being around different cultures, because people don't realize, like, you don't realize if you grow up in a place that you have a different flavor than other people who grew up in another place, just because you grew up in that place. And I love to harass every country, culture, and everything else when I'm there, like socialist, you know, Austrians, you know, for example, as you know, you know. And the funny part is, like, oh, my first international travel, other than Australia and New Zealand, which I went to with Gary, my first invitation to go someplace else was Sweden. And I went there, and one of the things I have is a keen eye for observation, you might say, and especially the energetic observation. And while I was there, I was noticing all of these uniquely Swedish characteristics. And the funny part is, Swedes and Austrians have the same level of superiority in how they are right, whatever they are being and doing, and no one else can compare. And it's funny to tell them that when you're in their country. They really love hearing things like that. Anyway, but I would point fun at things like if you're in Sweden and you're in an elevator, what is the most interesting thing in the elevator? The floor. Okay. People will not talk to each other in an elevator in Sweden, or at least they didn't used to. I've seen that change actually over the years. And then after being there several times and realizing that the reason they don't talk to each other is because the way you start a relationship with someone in Sweden is by, you want to know how?
How?
You ready? Here it is.
Yes.
You might miss it, but just watch for it, okay? Here's how you start a relationship in Sweden. Hi. Okay? Like you look them in the eyes and you say hi, you are now in relationship. You are on your way to getting married, you just don't know it yet. Which made me understand why they don't talk to each other in the friggin' elevator, right? So I would poke fun at things like this because for me, if we can make fun of it and laugh at it, we're no longer controlled by it. Well, a lot of people don't have my sense of humor. That may be an understatement. So it was funny because for years, Katarina thought I didn't like Sweden and I didn't like coming to Sweden. I'm like, oh my God, I love it here. It's wonderful. She's like, but you say this and this and this about Swedes. I'm like, yeah, that's because that's how you guys are functioning, as though that's true. I'm like, it's not true for any of us. You know, whatever flavor we grew up with around the world, we don't realize that there are many more flavors available. And the reason I poke fun is because if you're not laughing, you're being it and defending it and proving that it's right, which means you're stuck. If you are laughing, it's because you recognize it and you recognize that you probably do it too, but you're no longer stuck by it because anything that we can laugh at, we can more easily let go of.
So, if any one of our listeners now wants to listen to you poking the Swedish people, what class was it and what year?
That's a great question. Might have been around 2005 and maybe something on bodies, like maybe like a right body for you. I don't know if we had a right body for you at that point. 2005, 2007.
And about
Katerina would know far better than I. She's really good at dates like that. Um, that I think maybe it was even later.
well,
Maybe later.
I will ask Katarina. I will have more facilitators on my Access Me Salon asking them about their experience, how they started Access. And one thing I know about Katarina, you might not know them. Did you actually know that she called in sick at work to attend your class?
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Talk about a Swedish correct person being pulled in by consciousness and secretly calling sick to come to your class. I'm definitely
Oh,
going to listen to this class. Thank you so much, Dane. We know from that day on, you kept facilitating almost every weekend like a machine of consciousness, hundreds and hundreds of classes from all over the world, different cultures, different planets, different cities, and you just keep going. Thank you so much for everything you have contributed, everything you are, everything you be. And I hope there will be many, many more years to go where you will feed into the Access Me application, because as soon as a class hits the 2 year period when it took place, it will be added to the Access Me app and you can listen to it. So if you have now a little bit more desire to listen to classes, find out what Dane's very first question was, listen to the very first class he facilitated, facilitator training. There is a lot to explore and there's more to come. Thank you so much, Dane, for being my guest today, and
thank
can't wait
you.
to see you very soon.
My pleasure.